Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Matt Morrow, president of the Springfield Area Chamber of Commerce, and I just want to welcome everyone to today's call. We have a great group on the call today, and we have a great program lined up for you today as well, and I'll introduce our speakers in just a moment. Want to express our appreciation as a chamber team for your engagement on the virtual programming that we've offered during this pandemic period that we've all been working through. We really can't wait until we can all be together again in person, but we appreciate you turning to and trusting the Chamber of Commerce for your business guidance during this time. It's a responsibility we take very seriously. Our team is working really hard to bring the highest quality content to you, to the table, just like today's program that you'll be hearing here in just a moment. We have a lot to cover today, and we'll try to get to as many of those questions that you have as we can. And in addition, if you have a question that comes up during today's discussion, we can field those in real time also. You can email those to Lauren Musto on our team at lmusto@springfieldchamber.com. Again, that's LMUSTOE at springfieldchamber.com. And we'll do our best to get to them in today's program. Earlier today, you should also have received a link to the Show Me Strong Recovery Dashboard to reference during this call. We're going to be talking about that a little bit. The link to that dashboard can also be found on the Chamber's coronavirus webpage or also at showmestrongrecovery.mo.gov. So showmestrongrecovery.mo.gov or springfieldchamber.com/coronavirus, and you can get those resources there as well. As we've shifted from rapidly responding to gradually recovering from the ongoing coronavirus pandemic, we are all continuing to adjust to a rapidly changing normal. Prior to this public health crisis, Governor Mike Parson and leaders across the state prioritized and celebrated economic success through workforce development programs and infrastructure investments to really help make Missouri the best in the Midwest. We're making enormous progress on that audacious goal that was set, that we are all very proud of. Governor Parson has an incredibly innovative and passionate cabinet team, and they work tirelessly on behalf of Missourians. They did that before COVID-19, and I would venture to say that they are doing that even more so now, if that's even possible to say. As we look forward to what is next, we are still faced with many uncertainties in the COVID-19 world, and hopefully soon the post-COVID-19 world. But leaders with us today are doing all that they can do to help make sure that our recovery for businesses and individual Missourians is as strong as possible. We have a packed agenda today with a lot to get to, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guests, and then we'll turn to them. Rob Dixon is director of the Missouri Department of Economic Development. He's with us today, along with Zora Mulligan, who is commissioner of the Missouri Department of Higher Education and Workforce Development, and Katie Jo Wheeler is with us as well, and she's the deputy director of the Missouri Department of Natural Resources. Along with the link that we shared, you should also have received a bio for all of our speakers. And I'll just introduce Director Dixon to you, and he's going to take the program from there. He is, of course, a close friend to this Chamber of Commerce and to the Springfield community in general, having previously served as Executive Vice President for the Springfield Area Chamber of Commerce. So very, very grateful for the leadership that Rob Dixon has provided with his role at the state. And we say this around our office a lot, and I was talking to this team even just before the program started. I cannot think of a better person or better people to be in the roles that they're in right now than this team. And that starts with our friend Rob Dixon in his role as Director of Economic Development at this particular moment. And I'm so grateful that he is there. There's truly no one better suited for or more passionate about Missouri than he is at this moment as well. So I'm just going to turn things over to Rob to lead us through today's discussion about Missouri's path to economic recovery and bring in our other guests as well. Director Dixon, thank you very much and welcome, and the show is all yours.
Thank you so much, and thanks for those kind words, Matt. It is always great to be in Springfield, even virtually, and we really appreciate the support that you have given to all of us at DED and certainly across the entire administration, not just as we've dealt with COVID, but certainly over the last several years as we've set about to reset our state's economic and workforce development strategy. For longtime listeners of this program, you will certainly recognize the duo of Rob Dixon and Zora Mulligan working together on some issues, but we've also been joined today by Katie Jo Wheeler with the Department of Natural Resources. You're going to hear from both of these leaders here in just a second. But really what we are doing across the board in state government is kind of taking the public health response and the economic recovery efforts to COVID as two sides of the same coin. And we know that we're not going to be able to have success on one front without success on the other. And so literally all 16 state agencies are working together every single day to address this. And when I say working together every day, I mean that in a very literal way. We have a conference call every day. About 200 people are on it from all agencies and state government, and we're actually tackling some of these issues on economic and public health. So DED team is leading on some of these components, and then Zora and Katie Jo are leading in certain other areas. And so we'll talk about those today. We've really focused our economic recovery efforts into four major themes that are being tackled, as I mentioned, by state government team members across the entire administration. The first one is looking at how we can eliminate barriers to recovery for business. The second one is helping our communities so that they can, get back to full service on their front, helping individual Missouri citizens, and then also looking at infrastructure as a way to kind of stimulate and spur economic growth. And there's been a lot of activity on all four of those areas. We're not going to get into the public health side of the coin today, but we're going to talk a little bit about a deeper dive into each of those four areas of business, community, citizen, and infrastructure. I wanted to start off real quick, if I could, with kind of a brief overview of where we're at on the economy. And that's why we shared that link with you earlier today. If there's one thing worse than listening to somebody talk about economic statistics, it's doing it on a phone without charts. So we wanted to send that to you so you could look at that in your leisure time. And we do keep that updated. And it really compiles a wide variety of data points that affect our state's overall economy. And we are looking at that every day to help, really address these issues. So where are we right now? As you've seen, I'm sure, our unemployment rates have spiked. We are above where we were even in the Great Recession. The U.S. rate, is still extremely high at 13.3%. But, the last time we talked, and I had the opportunity to visit with the Chamber Board, a month or two ago now, and the expectation was that the unemployment rate was going to push 20%. And even the day before the last jobs report went out, economists across the country were expecting it to go close to 20%, and instead it went the other direction entirely. So we saw unemployment start to come back around 2.5 million new jobs across the country. And for the state of Missouri, we went from 10.2% down to 10.1%. So some modest changes, but certainly still at historically high levels. But half of those nationwide, that job growth was in leisure and hospitality. Tourism industry has been hit as hard as any industry across the country, and certainly in our state as well. Obviously, if people stop traveling and stay home and stop eating out, we're going to see that. So, and certainly in our state, those were the jobs that were most affected, but they're also the jobs that we're starting to see return as well. Hours worked at small businesses is down. The worst point of this back in kind of mid-April, the hours worked at a small business was down about 50%. That's starting to come back up, as well as revenues for small businesses in particular. So it's such a weird dynamic when you talk about the data right now, because we're in the middle of or coming out of such a deep hole that the statistics of today are still very bad, but they're all starting to point in the right direction, and we are making progress in the right way. So there are some positive signs on the horizon. One thing in particular that I think is really an important metric that we look at, especially for local governments and for small businesses, is consumer spending, and that's actually returning darn close to pre-COVID levels right now. Actually, this is not data, but a little bit of an anecdote. Talked to some folks from a large outdoor recreation and fishing and hunting store. I'm sure you guys could guess who I'm talking about, but they've reported that business has actually been fairly good, especially on some of the items like boats and whatnot, as people have completely changed their vacation plans over the summer or stopped them entirely, decided to buy a boat for their family instead, or to get out and do recreation type activities on their own that they can do social distancing. So it's really been a strange dynamic across the board, and we've seen significant increases in things like grocery stores, but significant decreases in sectors like restaurants, as we've all experienced. So take a look at the data and see, but the bottom line message here, I think, is that we're pointed in the right direction. Let me shift, if I could, over to what we're doing right now on the business recovery front. And the bottom line theme on this one from a state government perspective is we're looking at ways to make it less expensive and easier for businesses to open and stay open, or reopen and stay open. And it's kind of a very similar strategy in normal time economic development, but also certainly right now. A couple things that we're really looking at is the waivers. Several hundred waivers have been put in place. Regulatory waivers have been put in place across the board to make it easier for businesses to operate. We're looking at some assistance on companies that have already shifted their production to PPE manufacturing, or those that want to still, to see what we can do. The governor has been very focused on, frankly, not being dependent on foreign supply chains for critical supplies like PPE. So we're going to be looking at some assistance that we can provide to further incentivize activity in that area. We're also looking at some small business assistance programs that we can roll out using some of the CARES Act funding, as well as in a really important sector in tourism, to help support organizations like CDBs, the destination marketing organizations, to help them. One really exciting jobs note that I wanted to point out is up in the St. Louis area, yesterday we announced 1,400 new jobs locating in St. Louis County with Accenture. We also have several other fairly large job creation and capital investment projects that are still in the pipeline that we still anticipate announcing shortly. So from the economic development activity front, we're still seeing fairly good progress. And then finally, just very briefly on the community front, this section for us focuses on local government assistance and nonprofit assistance. And two programs I want to highlight here. One is the Missouri Development Finance Board will be taking final action to approve a small communities loan program to really help with operating expenses. These are generally not covered by CARES Act. Revenue that has been lost is generally not something that the CARES Act can help fund. So MDFB has put together a small loan program, generally not for cities the size of Springfield, but for a community like Hollister and others around the region, I know it will be a really important tool. And then finally, DED will be announcing a nonprofit grant program that we've been working on, especially for those organizations that generally use the youth opportunities and neighborhood assistance type programs. This will be something to help on that front, and we'll be rolling that out very shortly. So that is a very quick overview on the economic, business, and community side. I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Zora Mulligan to talk about the citizen piece. Zora. Zora, are you there?
I know we had her a little bit earlier.
Why don't we shift over to Katie Jo Wheeler to talk about the Department of Natural Resources and the infrastructure work that's going on. Katie Jo?
Hi. Thanks, everyone, for your interest in the work that we are doing on the infrastructure front. Wanted to talk with you about 5 focus areas that our team has developed. We have, at last count, at least 11 agencies that are participating in these efforts. And we're also reaching out to additional partners to expand the scope of what we're able to do. So our first focus area is just funding, making sure that we know all of the dollars that are out there, all of the federal grants and other opportunities, and frankly where the holes are, which we can talk about a little bit when we come to transportation, and making sure we're tracking those when the deadlines are, and making, state, local government, private entities that might be eligible for those funding opportunities aware of them, and providing some guidance where we can about how best to position yourself to obtain that funding. Our second focus area is broadband. I think we've learned through COVID about the risk that folks have of being left behind if they don't have internet access during these times. And so we are working with our teams to provide guidance to especially telehealth and education, and making sure that we are assisting folks in taking advantage of that Access and affordability are major issues for most of our state, and so we are identifying and deploying resources for broadband build out in our unserved and underserved areas. That includes provider education on resources and programs that already exist. That's also technical assistance and guidance regarding local development tools and various funding options. There is an FCC auction that is upcoming, and so we've been hosting a series of webinars for broadband providers to best position them to succeed in that auction opportunity. Our third area is investing in transportation infrastructure. That's roads, bridges, ports, and airports. Our partners at MoDOT do a lot of the work in the transportation arena. They do a lot of grant administration from the federal level, and so some of that is administering set funds. An example of that would be our airports. The federal government made available to each of our airports certain funding amounts, and so MoDOT has distributed those. In other instances, we're looking for specific grant opportunities that folks may be able to take advantage of. I would say, though, I think transportation is our most challenging area because there's a real major funding gap and challenges that we were working on in that arena already. And those have only been exacerbated by COVID and the low transportation numbers and low gas tax dollars that we have seen there. And so Patrick McKenna, who's the director of MoDOT, has been working tirelessly to advocate for additional federal funding in that area. Another of our focus areas is our state's energy system, assisting our utilities and building out infrastructure in that arena. We are maximizing our existing programs and looking for additional ways that we can help. That includes making some changes in our weatherization funding for low-income housing to make sure that our citizens who are in most need are able to pay their utility bills. Also working with utilities to help those who are not able to pay their utility bills. To the credit of our electricity providers, they have been working hard to not disconnect folks, but that's not something that they can sustain forever and continue to provide the services that we all rely on. So we are working with them to make adjustments in the work that we do and help them brainstorm ways to address those issues. We are also looking at shifting our focuses a little bit in our state energy planning. You may be aware that the Division of Energy moved from DED to the Department of Natural Resources last year, and so we are about to embark on a new energy planning set of stakeholder discussions, and we would invite those of you who are interested to participate in that. COVID has given a sharp new focus on those issues, and we would love to have your feedback there. And finally, we are working on our environmental infrastructure. The Department of Natural Resources administers funding opportunities for drinking water and wastewater infrastructure, and we partner with DED to do that as well. We are pursuing additional flexibility for funding requirements and match, and simplifying the application process in an attempt to get more dollars on the ground faster. So that is my summary. I'd be happy to turn it over to Zora if she's been able to reestablish her connection.
Zora, are you on?
Hey, hi guys, can you hear me? Yep, I apologize. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Zora, over to you.
Hey guys, sorry. So it's a delight again to be with you. Like Rob and Katie Jo, I wish I was there today. You guys know I went to college in Springfield, and so a summer day without Pineapple Whip is not a full summer day as far as I'm concerned. So the Citizen Group is a collection of state agencies currently. We've had some interaction with some potential external partners in the nonprofit universe. And we're really focused on supporting struggling Missourians and helping citizens become economically resilient. And so the things our group is focused on together is, activities within state government that are either started, stepped up, or stopped in response to the economic crisis that has come as a result of COVID-19. So it's been a really great conversation among a lot of different colleagues. We have 4 main groups of strategies. One is around people who are still kind of connected to a job, even if it's loosely. And so, that would be an example like the shared work program that our Department of Labor and Industrial Relations has, which allows people to continue, to stay on the payroll with their employer, even if they're working less hours. This is also kind of where the Department of Labor and Industrial Relations comes to problem solve on some of the issues they had, when their systems were really overwhelmed by the number of people seeking unemployment insurance benefits. And then some strategies around professional licensure. That was an area that was really disrupted because it was a heavily paper process, and we know it's an important part of people's work life. So, strategies around people who are connected to a job is one chunk of our work. We're also focused on a bunch of strategies that are connected to people who are, really unemployed, who aren't expecting to return to their existing employer. And unsurprisingly, a lot of that is about job search assistance, like the kind that's available through job centers around the state, as well as job training opportunities. And I'll talk in a little bit more detail about that later. The next group is safety net kinds of things. People who experienced a disruption in work, have a lot of economic issues that they're working through. So we're focused on strategies around food, shelter, childcare, physical health, mental health, and there's been a lot of really fantastic work there. And then the last is strategies around education, return to in-person instruction in the fall. So obviously top of mind for parents and communities around the state is what's going to happen in the fall. Are students going to be able to return? And so both we and our partners at the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education are working closely with local educators around the state, because we all acknowledge that kids have got to go back to school in the fall. Whether it's college students or elementary school students, the disruption represented for them and for their families is so significant that we really have to figure out how to do it and how to do it safely. So we're incredibly excited about this work. It's been really energizing. A couple of great examples that I'll hold up are to toot our own department's horn, and I apologize for that. We've got, we have kind of looked under the couch cushions everywhere within our department and have come up with money, including whatever reserve money we had, to put toward job training. So we've launched something called Return Strong, which is a campaign that gets information out to Missourians about job training opportunities. We've kind of reversed our call center. So usually we wait for people to call us and ask for information about job training. We've reversed that process so that we're now reaching out to people who've worked with us to file unemployment insurance claims so that they get the information about what's available during the time they are unemployed. So that's a great example. We've also got really good work happening from colleagues at our Department of Mental Health. They've been very proactive in getting a lot of trainings out and available, because lots of folks in different sectors are dealing with people in pretty serious mental distress, and having some very basic first aid training in mental health is a good tool there. Also have to say great work to our colleagues at DESE. They've been working closely with educators around the state, not just to think about the logistics of a return to in-person instruction, but recognizing the strong probability that at least some classes will have to be delivered online, or we need to be prepared for that possibility. And so they've got a really neat work group going with many of their teachers of the year who are providing a set of kind of best practices around online instruction. So there is a ton of really fantastic work going on, and I'm delighted to have a chance to talk with you about it today.
So Matt, I think you've got some questions for us, but we'd be happy to answer any questions. And as that part of it, the conversation today gets teed up a little bit here, I also want to just put in a shameless plug for a couple of our team members that are well known in Springfield and across the Southwest Missouri region. But a lot of the items that we talked about earlier in the call were developed by the leaders within DED and other state agencies, but certainly Mary Rajak, Teresa Sampaio, and Krista Atchison, who represent DED in Southwest Missouri, have been right there on the front lines, leading their teammates and leading other partners across the state to help develop some of these policies. And all of the things that Zora, Katie Jo, and I talked about, those three ladies that I just mentioned can help you guys access it in your community as well. But Matt, we're going to turn it back to you and have a little Q&A, I think.
Well, thanks so much, Rob, and thanks also Zora and Katie Jo for just a fantastic overview about where we are and where we're headed as a state from an economic perspective. You covered a lot of ground just in that overview, but I wanted to just take a moment, if we could, to cover some additional questions from some of our members, and then we'll pivot to that and ask as many of those as we have time to get to today. I'll start with kind of the intersection of public health and economic recovery. Rob, I know the DED is reaching out to Missouri businesses to encourage increased testing And I wonder if you could provide just a little bit of an update on testing resources available for businesses who want to provide testing for their customers or their employees. Where are we on that?
Absolutely. Thanks for that question. It's actually a really important one. We look at testing as kind of one of those just baseline requirements that our society, economy is going to need in order to return to economic and social activity before there's a vaccine. And recently, Governor Parson set a pretty solid and pretty bold goal for state government and state agencies to accomplish 7,500 tests a day in the state of Missouri. And that was across the board, across Missouri. And prior to that, frankly, we had not been getting too close to that number. But since we came together and rallied around that, we're meeting in obviously without a vaccine, testing is what to unlock things like contact tracing and isolation, which is what allows people to understand that.
Rob, I think we may be losing you just a little bit there. Can you still hear me?
Sorry, Matt. I can. Yep. Is that any better? I'm sorry.
Hearing just a little bit. Yes, that's better. That's better.
I'm sorry. Sorry about that. Yeah. So the bottom line is the testing is what's going to help us really get back to that confidence and economic activity. And so we do have a variety of resources on that website, that same website that has the link. The economic data, but showmestrong.mo.gov. There's resources and help for businesses that want to do testing. I know that it's a bit of a double-edged sword, frankly, for some businesses, that maybe there's a bit of a stigma that you don't want to get, or your employees don't want to get labeled as being the ones that work where the sick people are. But the bottom line is this is what is really important for our state to move forward, and there is no stigma with it. If we're all looking at it. But I would really encourage everybody to take a look at that website. And I would also encourage you to reach out to our DED team members, Mary, Teresa, and Krista, if you want to tap into some of that, because we need more testing. We're going to have it as this goes on. The virus is still here, but we're going to have to use that really to help us get back to some degree of normalcy. So thanks.
So kind of, I guess, expanding on that, we actually received this question just a few minutes ago from one of our members, manufacturing members, wanting to maybe dive a little deeper on what you mentioned earlier, Rob, about the support for companies manufacturing, shifting their production to manufacturing PPE in Missouri. Can we learn a little bit more about the program, about kind of where we are in that process and how you see that rolling out?
Absolutely. Well, as a benefit of your chamber membership, you guys get the first heard type news. But we're still developing the final details of that, so we don't have the ability to sit down and say, okay, this is exactly how you can apply for it. But what we're looking at doing, frankly, is utilizing some of the federal funding that the state has received to help us prepare for another response round to the virus. And so we will be putting that information out very soon. We're still finalizing some of those details. I've mentioned it today because I wanted you to know where we're headed with it, but we will certainly rely on the chamber and other partners to help us connect it with manufacturers and others. What we're really looking for is increased and sustained production of PPE that's going to help our state respond again in the future. One of the things, and this was a nationwide story, of course, but a lot of the PPE production was happening in China and in other foreign markets. And obviously, as the entire world was focusing on these issues, it gobbled up the supply chain and disrupted it. So the governor has been very focused on making sure that we have the reserves available to address these, both from the healthcare side as well as for some employers who need PPE as well. So we'll have much more details to come on that. I know it's going to be an important resource for you soon.
Well, thanks so much for your work on that. I know there are a number of businesses here who would love to be a part of that. Certainly want to try to help in any way that we can, and they're equipped well to do it too. Zora, I'd like to maybe shift to you for a little bit, if I could, on this question of our state unemployment rates. There's a question here about, and I'd just be interested in your perspective on this. even before COVID, our state unemployment rate was running pretty consistently, a little below what the national unemployment rate levels were. And the same seems to be true with where we are now. We're certainly higher than the employment rate than the national levels. To what do you attribute that? What are some of the, I mean, is there a reason for that, or something that we can make sense of it with?
Sure. So I think the answer here is similar to what we experienced during the Great Recession and other economic disruptions. And that's that Missouri's highly diversified economy is a tremendous strength. And so it means, you know, when you have an event that impacts one sector of the economy much more heavily than others, that it doesn't take the entire state down, although that's certainly not to minimize the impact on the sector of the economy. So, you know, the example that Rob mentioned earlier is tourism and hospitality, and that obviously in Missouri has taken a tremendous hit, although it is showing positive signs of returning. And so what that meant for us is, even though, you know, we have pockets of very high unemployment rates remaining, most of the state is showing signs of recovery. So if you look at states that rely really heavily on tourism, you know, those were the ones that hit that 20% mark that Rob mentioned. Nevada, Hawaii were in those categories. So, you know, what that allows us to do is really focus a set of strategies on the sectors that were most affected and the geographic areas that were most affected, as opposed to having to solve the entire state's problems before the end of summer.
Great perspective on that. And obviously that diversified economy is something that we we benefit from quite a bit. You mentioned, Zora, the tourism industry. I'm going to actually bounce off of that for just a moment. Katie Jo, Rob, you may have something to add here on this. Maybe if you could talk a little bit about the impact on our tourism industry as a state, and especially that's important in Southwest Missouri, and also impact on state parks. So tourism industry generally, and then specifically on our state parks.
Yeah, I'll start off on the general piece. If you look at just about any county by county map of how this has affected our state, whether it's unemployment, whether it's job loss, whether it's kind of sales decline, and frankly, even some of the social impacts, Branson, Taney County, Stone County were among the highest, if not the highest, in all of those categories. And it's exactly because of what we were talking about earlier, when the tourism economy just came to a screeching halt. And so I mean, you can literally see it in the data. The unemployment rate in Branson and Taney County and Stone County when this peaked was well above, nearly double the state's rates at the peak of this. So that's the highest impact on it. And, you know, turn it over to Katie Jo to hit on the parks piece, but we're starting to see the numbers return, and a big part of how we're going to get there is additional marketing and additional communications about how you can get back and how you can safely return to kind of some degree of normal tourist and visitor type efforts. So Katie Jo on parks.
Thank you. So in some senses, we have seen record crowds at our parks for day use activities, but we would agree that there has been a significant impact on Southwest Missouri with respect to our parks. So we had our campgrounds, our overnight lodging were closed entirely for the month of April and through May 18th, I believe. So compared to our 2019 dollars, we brought in $250,000 less. That's just income that comes through our park system. But overall, the million overnight campers we have a year across the state, 250,000 of those come from out of state. So we know that there are folks coming from out of state that spend dollars in Missouri that are not doing that right now, or at least didn't over the course of those couple of months. Our occupancy, you know, has been down, but we have taken pains to look at how we can do our lodging and camping in an appropriately social distanced manner. And so we have been able to reopen those, and we are seeing numbers rebound. With that said, in order to maintain appropriate distancing, we are having to limit occupancy. Sometimes that's 50%, sometimes it can be higher. So we are doing everything that we can to reopen the portions of our state park system that we think are driving people to Southwest Missouri's economy. But we understand that it's going to take some time for that to fully recover.
That's great perspective. I want to shift a little bit, if I can, to conversation a little bit about workforce. And it's interesting how these things go, and it seems to go in cycles a little bit. In the early part of this process, a lot of the concern from employers was, if I have employees that I've furloughed and want to bring back, and the unemployment benefit is such that it makes it maybe not in their best short-term interest to do that, does it get difficult to bring my own people back? And then that started to shift. And what we're hearing a lot more now from businesses is maybe those, say a manufacturer or somebody else who was maybe operating with 30 fewer people than they needed before this ever started. And so they're seeing this as maybe an opportunity to add some people during this time because more people are unemployed. But it gets complicated, and I guess I would just ask if you have any thoughts or guidance for employers. Maybe Zora, this is in your wheelhouse here, or Rob, just for using this time to capitalize on that larger workforce pool to fill skilled positions. What are some of the things you're seeing employers do who are trying to do that, trying to staff up?
Sure. So I can kind of answer it from my perspective, and I know Rob will certainly have his own. I would say, Matt, that in some ways the challenges are more similar to what we had a year ago than we recognize. So a year ago we had a challenge of having kind of too many people available. Not enough people available, and not enough skills in the workforce. The situation has really changed with the unemployment situation. So now there are lots of people who are going to be looking for work in the next 6 months and a year, but there still is a skills gap. And so from our focus, we've remained very, very, strongly focused on workforce development strategies. And so, this is a time that employers might be able to slow down a little bit and encourage people to get more training if their volume overall is down. I mentioned in my introductory remarks that we've got Return Strong, which is focused on getting short-term job training dollars out the door. Right now, we're really focused on messaging for programs that are short and that are available entirely online. We've got another couple of rounds of that we're going to be rolling out in the near future. So that's been really important. We're still pushing hard on Fast Track. We're waiting to find out what the governor is going to do with the budget for the upcoming fiscal year that starts July 1st. But we envision it being also a really important tool. So, again, from my perspective, even though the number of people available for work has really changed, the skills gap hasn't, and we make that a kind of a what we get out of work to solve, or what we get out of bed to solve every morning in our office.
Rob, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. First of all, my dog is barking, so I'm sorry about that. But the other thing that I would add in particular is that, workforce development is the key in economic development in 2020 and beyond, with COVID or no COVID. And so what we're seeing in particular is a fair number of companies who are looking at sort of how do we, in the very short term, how do we train employees on some of these new techniques that we're going to have to do, or new things related to COVID, just basic things that like employees didn't have to do before, like sanitizing equipment and some of those basic types of things like that. So some training for those very specific things. But we're also seeing manufacturers in particular continuing to look at the future in the long term, as they know that they're going to have to basically continue to train their employees. So in some parts of the state, manufacturers are working together to develop training consortium and things like that for the long haul. And then in others, they're still looking at the recruitment efforts. So our Missouri One Start program is designed specifically to help plug those kind of immediate workforce holes right now. And we've got a fair amount of companies that are actively hiring, and you can take a look at that at MissouriOneStart.com. So it's a really strange kind of mix across the entire spectrum right now. But I would agree with Zora in terms of it's still very similar to where we were prior to COVID. The only challenge that we're seeing, or not, I shouldn't say the only, but one of the biggest challenges that we're seeing right now, of course, is just the sheer number of people who are continuing to be on unemployment, and getting them trained, upskilled, and things like that, I think is going to be even more critical.
Each of you mentioned a program that's really important to us and to our members in mentioning Fast Track, and Rob, you mentioned Missouri One Start. Mo Excels is another in this category. All programs that we all worked very closely together and very hard to get across the finish line not that long ago, as it turns out, that are really aimed directly at the heart of the workforce and training needs for employers and for people to be able to skill up and increase their upward mobility and earning potential. But we also know the budget has created some unique challenges for these programs. I wonder if you have any thoughts. You've both mentioned them as critical programs as we move forward. I couldn't agree more. Zora, Rob, what are you seeing, or what do you think the status of these programs might be as we look ahead?
Zora, I don't know if you want to take it first or not, but it's no secret that the state's finances are really hurting right now, just like local governments and many businesses and even individual citizens. So we are, as an entire administration, are looking at cost reduction measures, budget restrictions, and the like that the governor is going to have to announce in the very near term. Our new fiscal year starts on July 1st. It absolutely will include additional cuts across the board, and it just is part of the unfortunate piece of this. Stop it! I'm sorry if you didn't hear that. I was yelling at my dog. I thought I was on mute. Sorry about that.
That was actually the very first time that's happened on one of our programs, Rob. He's got something cornered over there. I think you should check it out.
Yeah, it's a UPS driver. I'm so sorry, and I'm sorry to have yelled in your ear. That's even worse. Zora will never let me forget this.
Oh, wow.
The bottom
way
line,
to go viral.
sorry. Yeah.
That's a bad term. Nothing's going viral.
No,
we're not doing that.
But in all seriousness, though, the state's budget is definitely in rough shape right now. We're starting to see some signs of recovery that are happening. That should hopefully take some pressure off, but it's not going to relieve it, certainly in ways that we would like. I think to show you just the scale of it, the governor's looking at some of the priorities that we worked so hard on just last year, and you named it. Those are also on the agenda and on the block for potential restrictions. He's already announced some for fiscal 20. I'm sure we're going to have to look at some for fiscal 21 as well, just because of the fact that the situation is what it is. So no particular sector, no particular programs are being targeted. It's just the nature of the significant reduction in revenue that's north of $1 billion.
Zora, anything to add on that, on the future of these important programs? I hope we haven't lost Zora. We'll try to get her back, because I have a couple of other questions for her, so I don't want to lose that.
I really hope she didn't hear me yelling at my dog.
It's okay, not to worry, Rob. We've got the whole thing recorded. It'll be posted later
everybody
anyway.
else heard it, so thank you.
I'm going to turn that into a ringtone here, actually.
I'm here. So just by way of backstory, I have a notorious, known throughout the state bad dog, and Rob is usually really judgmental about my dog. So this has made my day. So I want to talk a little bit about Fast Track and about MoExcels, both of which are incredibly important. We early on at the Department of Higher Education and Workforce Development kind of identified our own economic recovery priorities before we connected them with the economic recovery work of the rest of the state. And one of them was to do everything within our power to minimize the negative financial impact on our higher education institutions. And we do that knowing that what Rob said is exactly correct, and that our state budget situation is very dire, and it will almost certainly have negative repercussions for our public colleges and universities. One of the things that we were able to do early on was talk with the governor's office about the current fiscal year MoExcels money and find out whether it was going to be restricted. And I want to express a great deal of gratitude to Governor Parson for making a difficult decision to go ahead and allow the rest of that money to be spent in the current fiscal year. So that it was really, really fantastic news that has kind of gone unreported, but it's a big deal that he made that choice. And so what that means, in Springfield, Missouri State is nearing completion of work on upgrading its nursing facilities, which are of course now more important than ever. It means that OTC is continuing to plug forward with its advanced manufacturing center, which is going to be a game changer for Springfield. They were able to use their year one money to buy a lot of equipment, which I understand they actually currently have in operation. So there is some silver lining in a pretty cloudy sky. And again, I want to express a great deal of gratitude for Governor Parson prioritizing that work. In terms of Fast Track, we came out of the legislative session with an appropriation that should allow us to expand the number of programs and the number of students that we're going to be able to serve. We don't know exactly what's going to happen with that appropriation because the fund sources, as Rob mentioned, are hit pretty heavy on all sides. So we are waiting and seeing, but we have some cautious optimism that we're going to be able to roll forward Our coordinating board approved some additional programs that students could use fast track funds for, many of which are going to be in high demand in the near future. So we're cautiously optimistic and we're planning for success. We'll find out what happens as the fiscal year winds down and we prepare for the next one, but we're cautiously optimistic that we're going to be able to continue to move that program forward. I would also say, I mentioned that we were able to kind of scratch around within the agency and identify some additional federal job training funds. We're going to continue to do that. So, we don't have a one program strategy here. Fast track is always going to be my first choice because it's my baby. But if we need to move forward with other kinds of funds to support other kinds of training for other individuals based on their kind of personal situations, that's fine too. I just want to do everything I can to help Missourians gain the skills they need to succeed in the economy.
Zora, I actually want to kind of stay with you on that point because as you start to pivot toward resources available for people going back to school, doing some of those things, fast track and other resources like that, we sit today at June 24th, and I know you're thinking about the fall. I know you're thinking about how people go back to school for colleges and universities, K through 12, all of it. What are some of the considerations that you're thinking about right now? Maybe talk a little bit about what the state's doing to help facilitate the return to schools this fall at all these different levels, what students and parents maybe should expect.
I'm sorry for the lag. Ryan keeps muting me. He's heard about my dog. Yeah, so it's going to be different. I mean, the individual institutions are working within their communities with their local public health agencies to identify the guidelines for their reopening. Those are very institution specific, and they will be responsive to the level of COVID prevalence within each community. So, the level of caution might be very different in a community that's seeing a spike in cases than one that isn't. I'll just kind of make a couple of editorial comments, and one is related to an observation that Rob made about the reluctance to engage heavily in testing because there might be a stigma. Another is an issue that I know is really hot in Springfield right now about masking. But my kind of observation is that the education institution's ability to keep students, faculty, and staff safe is going to depend very heavily on the extent to which safe behavior is normalized in the community. So if you're expecting students to wear masks on campus, or if you're expecting campuses, to voluntarily engage in a lot of testing, that's only going to work if it feels normal to the students, faculty, and staff who are part of this. So I think we as leaders within the state and the community have to do everything we can to normalize safe behavior, wearing masks, getting tests. I predict that every community is going to see, a lot of positive COVID cases. It's not like the Black Plague. It's something that's just going to happen. So those are my editorial comments, and I apologize. Our role at the state, we're working with institutions to identify where the gaps are and what their major outstanding questions are. I also want to commend Governor Parson again. He has been very open to a conversation about providing financial resources that schools can use to safely reopen, both in terms of preventative measures as well as testing. Those plans aren't final, but there's a lot of positive conversation that's occurred. And I think, in a situation where we have revenue shortfalls in one category, it's really, really important to do what we can with other kinds of money to do what we need to do is important. In terms of individual students and kind of what they should expect, again, it's going to be different. But I think we have to acknowledge the importance of sticking with the plan. Our department has been doing messaging to students, parents, and school counselors about what we call Motivate Missouri, which is, again, just intended to keep people on their educational path, even if it might be a little bit different. I guess I would close just by saying we've tried life on lockdown. We've tried to step out of what we would consider our normal activities, and it really stank. And so for high school or college students who are thinking, maybe I'll just stay home, maybe I'll just sit this one out, what I would say is don't, just go. It's going to be different, but I guarantee there are going to be a lot of very quality experiences to be had, and just stick with it. So that's all I got. Any other questions?
Well, and so, of course, certainly for students, I mean, it's great counsel, Zora, I think, because if they don't do that, they're costing themselves a year of career, they're costing themselves a year of sort of a productivity in the workforce and all those kinds of things by sitting out a semester, sitting out a year. So yeah, I would certainly echo that. I'm going to turn back to Rob for a second. We saw good May employment numbers increasing by 34,000 jobs. That's obviously the direction we want to see things going. I wonder if you could talk a little bit, Rob, about the industries that saw increases and maybe some strategies that the Department of Economic Development is implementing moving forward to help continue to increase those job numbers.
You bet. And so I touched on it a little bit earlier, but the industries that are recovering right now are also the ones that had that very hard and immediate hit. So in particular, leisure and hospitality jobs are starting to come back. Another sector that's actually been really interesting in both nationally as well as at the state level is the healthcare sector, the non-hospital healthcare sector. And even in the federal data that came out for the month, I think it was something to the tune of nearly 500,000 jobs in the healthcare sector were coming back online. But the vast majority of those were like dentists and things like that. So as PPE availability started to open up kind of downstream from the hospitals and the kind of the immediate care providers, other entities like that, like dentist office and the like, could go back to work. So in the state right now, we're really seeing that recovery starting to being led by our like I said, the leisure and hospitality and tourism industries in particular are the ones that are coming back online. They still have a big hole to climb out of. The thing that does make me a little bit nervous, just to be candid about it, is they're still vulnerable to future waves and future changes in the virus itself. And so that's where we're going to have to really focus to see it coming back online and make sure things like testing and contact tracing and the like are being used to help mitigate it to the effect possible. Other sectors are still a little bit farther behind. Manufacturing in particular has just been disrupted from the supply chain to the frontline workforce. It's not consistent across the board. But those are the areas that we're really seeing it. It's almost the exact opposite of what the job losses were early on. And that, I think, is a good sign as we look at a potential recovery. But every single prognostication that I have offered or that other folks have offered, certainly even nationwide and national, international economists have offered, have proven to be wrong. And I think that just shows you how difficult it is to get a handle on what's happening right now and how it will play out. The concept of, is it a V-shaped, a hockey stick shape, L-shaped, whatever type shape recovery, I really don't know that anybody knows yet. I will tell you there are broadly based signs of recovery. That means in every sector, and that means in the ones that were the hardest hit. And so that's a good sign. But in terms of where it's going long term, I think we still have to wait and see how it plays out. But signs are pointing in the right direction.
You mentioned earlier, Rob, some exciting news in terms of announcements at the state level for economic development projects. We've had some good economic wins here in Springfield as well. You may have heard Costco is planning to enter our market. Kraft is working on a significant reinvestment project here in their Springfield facility. And I guess I would just ask, anything else on the economic horizon that we should be watching for or keeping our eyes out for in the weeks or months ahead?
Yeah, we've got a couple of large job creation as well as large capital investment projects that we'll be able to announce in the next few weeks. And I think it's an interesting sort of commentary on where things are as well, that we had some projects that were in the pipeline that basically just put an entire halt to their search. Some of those were kind of internationally based businesses and things like that. They just said, we're going to wait and see entirely how this all plays out. We're done. We've also had others that we're working with, and these are the ones that are going to be announcing here shortly, but especially in e-commerce and especially in distribution, as people stopped going to the store and started shopping online or increasing their online shopping overall. That's, you're seeing it across the board in terms of those businesses that are thriving. And so we're going to have some good announcements pretty soon on that, e-commerce and logistics in particular. But overall, our project pipeline is still fairly strong.
Yeah. Just so important. I mean, as I listen to you, just so important to be nimble, to be able to adapt as the circumstances on the ground change, because each time these significant changes happen, they also create new opportunities, and the ones who are quick and alert will be the ones that get those.
Absolutely.
So, quick question that's kind of related in a way to many of the things we've talked about. We know that there's an increased focus right now on things that maybe we could be doing from an economic perspective to do maybe a better job of supporting minority-owned businesses in the state, in our community, than maybe historically we have. I wonder, is there anything the state's doing specifically to support Missouri's minority-owned businesses as we recover from the pandemic? And this is kind of open to anyone here on the call who might have something to share with us on that.
So I'll start off. A couple things that really come to mind, and they're really focused on kind of our work in some of our state's urban areas in particular. DED oversees a wide variety of our community development and redevelopment type programs. We've been working on, especially in the St. Louis region in particular, I've been working with some community partners up there who are working in kind of the North St. Louis City community in particular to really combine business and training opportunities with community services, kind of all in a wraparound type of an agency. And so we've been helping on that front. The other things that I think are really important are opportunities that, I'm struggling a little bit how to answer this, but, the old-fashioned thought of economic development was if you bring in a large employer, or if you help an existing large employer grow, it will create ripple effects throughout the economy. And I think some of that still very much is true, even if that is kind of an old traditional view of economic development. And in particular, around the NGA site in North St. Louis, that's a $2 billion capital investment that is transforming North City St. Louis in a wide variety of ways. So we're focusing on some of the community development issues on that front, as well as kind of on the startup side around it as well, because you've got this really large anchor industry coming in with geospatial, and there's a lot of folks in the minority community that are able to access some of the benefits that come of that as well.
It's kind of a very complex equation, but I think what I hear you saying is let's look for ways that we can extend the benefits of these projects to people who historically maybe haven't been in the best position to benefit from them. But there's really no environment where anybody benefits where we're not creating a bunch more opportunity. And so,
That's right.
It begins by creating that opportunity. Well, a lot of times in times of trial challenges, those same difficulties can give us a chance to reevaluate or reimagine the future in ways that we wouldn't normally or necessarily do otherwise. I know this pandemic has been brutal for individuals, for businesses, for institutions, really for everyone. But if you had to find some opportunities that are going to be inevitably coming from all of this, I would just ask each of you, what do you see as maybe one of those opportunities? Anyone who feels like going first here certainly can. I just interested in your take on that as you look forward.
I'm happy to chime in. It's Sora. As I mentioned, we had a set of goals, and one of them was that higher education and the public workforce system would emerge from this more resilient and flexible than they were going in. And we see a lot of signs that has happened. The job centers around the state shifted really rapidly to serving customers in modes other than face-to-face and during times other than 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. And that's been a really important shift, and that's definitely here to stay. On the higher ed side, we did an after-action report with all of the colleges and universities to focus on the rapid transition to online education. And while we certainly identified challenges there were a lot of very positive signs about flexibility that's likely to serve institutions and students well as we move forward into the future.
Great perspective.
This is Katie Jo. Mm-hmm. And I would add that the ways our operating rhythms have changed as state government, especially when we sent a good proportion of our workforce home to work remotely, we were a little surprised in some of the places where we gained efficiencies doing that. We were concerned that we would be much less efficient in that environment. And so we definitely want to capitalize on the places where our operating rhythms have become more efficient. How did that work? What can we keep about that when the new normal truly becomes normal? And also the cross-collaboration with other agencies. I was a little nervous that the amount of time that we were spending together would just be, additional kind of administrative burden. But we have really succeeded in leveraging some resources and cross-collaborating in a way that I think has been incredibly beneficial. And so we want to keep that up long after the immediate emergency is gone. And Rob, I'm going to help you out here by having baby background noise since I don't have a child care provider today. So no matter what I tell him, he's not going to stop. So,
well, I would suggest don't yell at him like I did, because that doesn't work on dogs at all. So babies, I'm sure, probably less so. Matt, the only thing I would add to that is, with our transformation and reorganization through Best and Midwest, on our kind of to-do list this year was to further our use of technology and customer friendliness in the ways of doing business with DED. And as a result of, frankly, having to go to telework status, 100% our entire department is in telework status, and we went in a very short period of time. That is something that we were kind of forced way ahead of schedule to do. We had people manning scanners, scanning documents in and things like that, so we could have the electronic files to work on while our folks were home. And we'll never go back to paper and basically paper and pencil ways of doing business. So it has forced a degree of technology adaptation that I don't think we would have done as quickly as we did. And the website, the economic data that I talked about earlier, that is stuff that we did not have in the same way or even in the same levels prior to this. And so the situation has just sort of forced us to innovate in state government, and all the things that Zori and Katie Jo talked about in particular are spot on, but also just the way that we operate our organizations has changed. And I expect that would be the case in public and private sector.
Well, the sacrifice has been significant, and to be alert during that time and identify those ways that we can become better. They say necessity is the mother of invention, and I think you're living that right now, just like a lot of businesses are right now. I wish we had more time. Unfortunately, our time is up for now, but I do want to thank all of our speakers. Thank you for not only providing us with this timely deep dive on information today, but also for your tireless efforts and commitment to just keeping Missourians as healthy and safe as possible, and for being so intentional and collaborative with each other and also with the other businesses and the business community around our state on the state's recovery. Thanks also to all our members for joining us today and for your questions. If your question was not answered today, if we ran out of time or you just had another question that we just couldn't get to, you need more clarification on anything discussed, please do reach out to Lauren Musto on our public affairs team. Her email address is lmusto@springfieldchamber.com. Again, that's LMUSTOE@springfieldchamber.com. And please keep visiting the Chamber website and look for Chamber emails for up-to-date business, safety, and policy-related information that you can apply and use in your day-to-day operations as you navigate all of these new challenges as well. Also have some exciting news to share. On July 29th, we will be hosting our first in-person event for the Chamber of Commerce since the onset of this pandemic. And we could not be more excited to welcome Missouri Governor Mike Parson for the annual State of the State address. That's on July 29th. This event will look very different than what we are accustomed to, and we'll be taking all of the safety precautions necessary, including appropriate social distancing and other measures as well. Unfortunately, we will not be able to serve a meal as a part of that event, but I just can't think of a better time or opportunity to gather together than to hear the State of the State remarks from Governor Parson in this unique moment in our state's history. We hope you can attend, and would ask you to please just stay tuned for more information from the Chamber about our July 29th State of the State event. We're so grateful for your membership. I want to thank you for joining us today, and thank you for all that you're doing to support and grow our economy and create opportunities for people who live here. And I want to thank you for being a part of the Springfield Area Chamber of Commerce.